Good morning and welcome to the launch of Radio Centre's latest research project, Radio, the Performance Multiplier. The research presentation should take about an hour and you'll be hearing from Tom Roach from Digital Marketing Services Jellyfish, Jason Brownlee, who's the founder of research agency Colourtext, Radio Centre's Head of Insight Donna Burns, and of course, Radio Centre's Planning Director Mark Barber. I'm going to be back at the end with questions. So if you have any questions and you'd like to ask the presenters as we go through, can you put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, not in the chat box? And we'll go to them at the end of the presentation. So if you do have time at the end, please stay on for that. So this project has been complex and has taken a fair amount of time to put together. But before we dive into the detail of the research, I just wanted to take a step back and look at the background of the study. So Napoleon once described us Brits as a nation of shopkeepers, but actually over 200 years later, I think it's pretty safe to say that the nation has become a nation of online shoppers. This Enders analysis and ONS data demonstrates how UK spending online on goods and services reached 413 billion in 2023, having increased by almost 50% since 2019. So that's since the pandemic, it's absolutely exploded. And it's not surprising that businesses that trade online are upping their advertising to spend to win a larger share of this rapidly growing and dynamic market. Naturally, the main objective of marketing activity for these online businesses is to drive visits to their website by prospective customers. And no one can hope that these people will simply stumble across their website without some direction. But however, from the Nielsen analysis also shown here of media spend behavior amongst a representative mix of over 200 online businesses or so-called brands born online, reveals that collectively they're now spending the majority, over 62% of their media budget in offline media. Now, in some ways, this feels sort of somewhat counterintuitive. Why has a large cohort of brands that trade purely or mainly online, whose business model relies on generating clicks to their website as efficiently as possible, started going beyond pure play digital response channels and spending such a high proportion of their budget in offline media? And crucially, could radio be getting a bigger allocation of this budget than it currently gets? Well, to explain this and to help set the broader context for this research, I'm delighted to be handing over to our first speaker, Tom Roach. Tom is the Vice President of Brand Strategy at Jellyfish. Tom's going to discuss how performance-focused brands often hit a growth plateau, so-called the Performance Plateau, and he'll look at how they'll have to develop new approaches to take growth to the next level. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks very much, Lucy. So yeah, it's become really common for brands with a performance mindset to hit this plateau that Grace Kite and I coined the Performance Plateau. It's what happens when brands get to a point where the success of their traditional mix of search, social, display will level off, leaving them looking around for new ways to grow. And they learn that what get them where they are now, what got them where they are now, won't get them where they want to go. So I'm going to talk about what needs to happen when your brand's stuck on the plateau, some of the changes in philosophy and beliefs you'll need to go through, and some of the changes you're going to need to make to the way you communicate as a brand. Now, it's kind of some sort of marketing law that when talking about this sort of stuff, you have to show charts like this. Seminal work of Binet and Field, and the ideas behind and the principles behind the performance plateau work that Grace Kite and I've done really does have its roots in the work of Binet and Field, and you can see those two classic work on the left and those two classic charts on the right, with the sort of the broad thinking around the two different ways that marketing communications can work, and the optimal balance or the rule of thumb around 60-40 that gets talked about a lot. And this has become known recently as Bothism. Mark Ritson started talking about all this as Bothism a couple of years ago. And that was partly as a result of an article that I'd written called The Wrong and the Short of It, which was a take on all this stuff. Ritson shared it on LinkedIn and asked other marketers to read it, this article. And one marketer, David Thomas, pointed out in a LinkedIn comment that he expected this article and Ritson's promotion of it would become known as the Bothism model. So Bothism is really what this is all about. But Bothism isn't necessarily totally right from the very beginning for startups and some scale-ups, where performance-focused marketing approaches will drive more incremental ROI from the same budget versus low performance spenders. For scale-ups, there's still something advantage to being more performance-focused. But for bigger brands, if they are too performance-focused, it can be detrimental to their overall performance, with big brands who are performance-focused underperforming to the tune of 0.7 times. So this data is from Grace Kite and Magic Numbers, and from her work on the ARC database, which is a database of hundreds of econometric models by ordinary brands, not kind of effectiveness award winners. But charts like Binet and Fields don't always totally reflect the real world options available to brands and to modern marketers. For example, where performance activity is usually always on rather than pulsed, and where the idea of scaling back dramatically on performance activity or even switching it off just isn't really an option, and a realistic option, because it would be deemed too risky. So to illustrate this, the journey that brands can go on, Grace Kite and I created this chart building on the classic Binet and Field zigzag chart, which is really taking the perspective of a common real world scenario, that of a digital first brand whose initial strong growth from always on performance activity has leveled off, after which point brand building activity is successfully deployed and then helps take growth to the next level. It's based on lots of econometrics work by Grace and Magic Numbers for loads of brands facing similar challenges. Someone recently called it the ramp and bump chart, which I think is a nice way to sum it up. It shows growth initially being driven by performance, and then this kind of flat plateau where the brand is thinking about what it's going to do next, is probably rather nervous about what's happening, questioning all their data, looking at what's going wrong, maybe seeing ROAS dropping, and not being able to quite work out how to take the next step. And then you see a successful transition into layering in brand activity, with the short and long-term effects of brand activity in those kind of those teeth as you see them, and also a bump up in performance as well in the pink there. So you get this kind of triple whammy effect, and everything then works together. It's obviously an idealistic picture, and it can take some time to get right. But the really interesting thing about when we presented this, people started actually focusing on that rather boring bit in the middle, saying actually that's the bit that's most interesting about this, is this kind of this resonant time when brands are getting a bit stuck, are trying to rethink what they need to do. And actually the reality can look placid. The chart can look placid, but the reality can feel rather existential. So let's talk about getting off the plateau and what it takes. So it means going from only harvesting existing demand to also priming future demand and then harvesting it. So it sounds so simple, but that place in the middle is really hard. It's a problem that seems to have its roots in the performance-oriented mindset of the millions of SMEs who make up the bulk of today's advertisers, and the continuation of that mindset well past the point at which, when their scale suggests they really should have adopted a more balanced marketing approach. There's some sort of friction in the system which stops them from transitioning, and it really makes it quite hard. And it's about adopting a completely new mindset, because this thing of what got you where you are now won't get you where you want to go. All the low-hanging fruit seems to have been picked. Within the marketing team, nervousness is setting in, and it's really a time to unlearn and rethink everything. You need to go through a period of introspection and analysis, and really developing a new philosophy about how everything's going to work for you. You might need to create a new growth model for your brand, a new model for how you think brand communication and performance communication are going to work together. You might need to hire new people, new partners, agency partners. You'll definitely need new metrics and new measurements. And one of the issues is that performance-oriented brands can lack the skills and experience and people and partners needed to take them to this next level. So there's lots of different changes that you'll need to make. There are also some really kind of damaging beliefs, I think, that have become accepted in some areas that really hold brands back from making the transition. And what I'm talking about here is sort of anti-advertising philosophies that have their roots, I think, in the original dot-com bubble. And you read quotes like this one from Peter Thiel that have become sort of orthodoxies in particularly in the sort of tech startup world, where if you have to advertise, then somehow that's failure, that it means your product or your brand doesn't have the kind of X factor of virality and word of mouth that great products and brands should apparently have. And you really need to challenge that, because it's not actually very helpful to making this transition. And these kinds of beliefs were taken on by people like Bezos and made famous in quotes like this one. And you see it in Elon Musk, who's only very recently kind of allowed any kind of paid for advertising for Tesla at all. And in fact, in his initial response to what they've been doing is to actually sack the entire marketing team as a result, apparently. So really, it's kind of tense moment for brands, even quite big brands, if they've been resisting the temptation to do more kind of brand activity. If you think about, Bezos himself, advertising is the price you pay for having an unremarkable product or service. He absolutely took on this philosophy. And while he doesn't believe this today, I mean, other names do really stick rigidly to it. And I think it's quite a kind of a disruptive belief to hold on to. And it can be quite damaging. Now, of course, Bezos famously changed his mind when the facts changed. And so he's really the model in a way that brands need to follow. And in fact, he did probably one of the most famous U-turns in advertising, going from believing that to then learning through Amazon's own data that advertising could be very powerful for them. And in fact, then building their own incredibly large advertising business and network, and becoming a very, very major brand advertiser as well. So be more Bezos and less Musk is probably the lesson here. You need to challenge your own beliefs. You need to challenge your own beliefs. When the data changes, you can change your mind. A brand that did this in the UK was the subscription meal kit brand Gusto. Great case study from the IPA a year and a half ago. They were too reliant on paid ads for customer acquisition, with 100% of their budget spent on performance advertising and 80% of customer acquisition coming via paid ads. And they kind of rethought and relearned what they needed to do, and they gradually increased their split to the classic 60-40, 60% brand, 40% performance, which helped increase awareness, brand equity, and base sales. And that decreased their reliance on paid ads for customer acquisition. So actually building a base through the layering in of brand advertising meant they were less reliant on paid advertising, because they had more organic sales coming in. And they built a brilliant new model for how advertising would work for them, which was all about creating a demand pool, a pool of primed customers who were there, kind of, I guess, ready and waiting to be activated by their performance activity when ready. So really, it just shows a really, really smart internal organization that was able to convince themselves to take that next step. The work Grace and I have done on all this, just to publicize the plateau and really just that chart actually, and publicize the dangers of not doing any brand building, has self-led marketers to being able to persuade others of what they need to do. So a marketer at iDrive shared with me that they'd adopted the principles we talk about and subsequently grew that brand to become the world's second largest ride-sharing app after Uber. Similarly, somebody came to me from Travelport, said he'd used the chart itself in their kind of internal convincing of their internal audiences to show what they hope to achieve, and then validated that approach through a subsequent commercial uplift. And we get marketers confessing to this kind of stuff all the time, where they've had this kind of internal conversation about how they need to change, and using this philosophy and this thinking to help them do that. So now on to radio, and just a couple of pieces on turning to radio and how it all fits into this. Because I guess normally I spend a lot of time talking about video, but radio has many of the characteristics that makes video so successful as well at doing all of this sort of stuff. particularly around building future demand. Historically, brands will use lots of radio for and see it more as a performance channel, as a kind of as a sales activation channel. It can do both, and the latest work from Thinkbox, their profitability to business case for advertising study, shows a really good long-term ROI for audio of £4.98. So really strong case for the future demand building benefits of radio. So radio is a pretty strong contender, given its proven ability to drive both short and longer term results, as a really useful channel for helping you do both brand building and activation simultaneously, i.e. being bothist. Now back to the team at Radio Centre, who are going to show you why radio is the performance multiplier. Over to you, Donna.
Thank you, Tom. Let's move on to the next slide. So yes, so as you saw from Tom's slides, now there is plenty of existing evidence to suggest how radio can play a valuable role in both balancing, generating and converting existing demand for brands, the two key components for sustainable longer term growth for these performance-led businesses. Now, if that's the case, you may be asking yourselves, so why is it so difficult to isolate radio's effect in uplifting web traffic for online businesses? Now, we believe there are two key challenges getting in the way. Now, the first is one that actually all offline media face, and that is bridging the gap between offline exposure and online response to demonstrate effects, especially compared to the breadcrumb trail of tracking cookies that fuel last click attribution. Now, a method that's evolved over recent years for measuring TV for performance campaigns has consisted of looking, analysing the uplifts in web traffic during a short response window, typically 20 minutes immediately following each TV spot. However, if you use the same short-term response window attribution approach for radio is actually seen to underperform compared to other channels, which leads us neatly onto the second and unique challenge that radio faces. And that is, according to the IPA touchpoints, 9 out of 10 radio listening occasions take place whilst people are doing other things. Now, this is really crucial to acknowledge because it means that listeners aren't always available to respond immediately, certainly in comparison to media that require primary attention, like social media or TV. Now, our hypothesis, which builds upon learning from previous research studies, are that firstly, the multitasking nature of radio means that it merely delays rather than limits response. But because of this, spot-by-spot short-term response window attribution is just unable to capture accurately the full effects of radio advertising. And it's due to this delay in responding that when people do respond, they are less likely to recall a specific web address and therefore more likely to respond indirectly. Now, this means that the full effects of radio can only be realised by reviewing changes in response across a whole range of referral sources. So, for example, digging deep and looking at organic search and other pure play online response channels, including pay-per-click and paid social. So in summary, these factors can really help explain why current attribution approaches really struggle to accurately identify radio's contribution to performance campaigns. And they also explain why this project really needed some different thinking. And hand over to you now, Mark.
Thanks, Donna. So acknowledging this context and the difficulties that people told us they're encountering in demonstrating radio's effectiveness in the context of performance marketing, we set ourselves the objectives that you can see on screen now, and I'm going to assume you're a pretty literate bunch and not bother reading them out to you. But worth saying, though, that for those of you unfamiliar with Radio Centre's work, this is a fairly standard and straightforward set of objectives for a broad-based radio effectiveness project of this nature. Much less straightforward, however, is the process that we had to employ to deliver against these. And because it's crucial to underpinning the credibility of the findings we're going to be taking you through, I hope you'll appreciate why we're going to focus a bit of time explaining the approach we took in some detail. And the really big question we had to address with our selected approach was, how is it possible to accurately capture an offline medium's online response when it's likely to be delayed or realized over a yet to be determined period of time and delivered through a range of response channels. So to help answer this question, we turn to independent research agency Colourtext, which has rich experience in media effectiveness research and big data analyses. So here to talk you through what we did and how we did it is the founder of Colourtext, Jason Brownlee. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good morning, everyone. So, discussing this challenge in detail with the Radio Centre team, we quickly established that probably regression modelling was the best or perhaps only means of addressing the methodological conundrum that lies at the heart of this project. Within this context, we realised that to underpin the credibility of the findings, it was essential that the analysis was based on real-world data relating to real-world in-market campaigns. So, we developed a self-tuning multiple regression model to help us identify the correlation between multimedia impacts, which we took as our independent variable, and web sessions, which we took as our dependent variable, the thing we're trying to explain for participating campaigns. Now, the two sets of data required for running this level of analysis are, by necessity, extremely detailed. So our first data set consists of Google Analytics data, namely the total volume of daily web sessions for the brand broken down by referral source. Our second data set relates to media weight and media spend. Here, the information we required from participating campaigns consisted of all adult impressions by medium, by day, together with total spend by medium by week. The information contained in these two data sets covered the full radio campaign period and a minimum of 2 weeks either side pre and post campaign. From this data, the self-tuning model establishes the extent to which daily impressions in each medium exert influence over the variance in daily web sessions. Okay, so building on this initial analysis, the model is then equipped to establish a baseline level for daily web sessions across the radio campaign period. And this assumes that no demand generation media activity has taken place. And here's an example of what that baseline looked like for one of the brands in the study. Then, by comparing actual data from Google Analytics with this baseline, we can establish the total media-driven uplift in web sessions during the radio campaign period, as you can see here. Finally, based on the level of influence of each medium already determined by the model, we can ascertain the proportion of this total uplift that is attributable to each medium, as you can see again on the chart here. Now, in addition to this daily multimedia information, specifically for radio, we also requested 7 days of minute-by-minute data for both data sets, representing a typical week within the overall radio campaign period. Based on this more detailed information, Colourtext then developed a regression model using a self-tuning add stock function to analyze the strength of the relationship between web sessions and radio advertising impacts. And we did this on a minute-by-minute basis. This was to allow us to test our hypothesis about radio's delayed response effects by quantifying the time lag between a radio spot being transmitted and when it delivers its full response potential. And to show us more about what we found out, back over to Donna.
Thank you, Jason. So that is what we set out to deliver, and our ambition was to obtain data at this level of detail for as many in-market campaigns as possible. Now, the recruitment drive involved the Radio Centre team reaching out to 11 different agencies, talking about over 20 potential radio campaigns, that all of which would involve a very clear online call to action. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, given our extremely detailed and demanding data requirements for Jason's analysis, only a handful of advertisers and agencies took up our offer to participate in this groundbreaking analysis. Now, acknowledging the huge commitment in terms of time and effort required to provide the necessary data, we'd like to say a really big thank you to those advertisers and their agencies that got involved in their project, without whom this analysis and the game-changing findings that we from it would simply have not have been possible. So thanks very much to HomeServe via December 19, Harry's and Checkatrade by Good Stuff, and National Express from M6. Now, this self-selecting sample consists of an interesting range of businesses feeding our analysis with 4 very different campaigns, each placing a significant investment in demand generation media. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, so as you can see from this chart, their total aggregated media spend during the analysed time frame was £3.25 million, with TV and BVOD, along with radio and digital audio, accounting for the vast majority of spend. Important to note here that pay-per-click spend and impacts have not been included in the analysis, as it almost exclusively relates to converting demand created by other media, rather than generating demand in its own right. This is fairly common practice for modelling work such as this, and such an approach was recently endorsed by Ubiquity in a LinkedIn post. Finally, for the purpose of this project, to attain optimal statistical significance, we combined radio and digital audio impacts in the model, similarly TV and BVOD. And for simplicity, we refer to the total audio effects as radio. And this feels appropriate given the fact that radio represents 85% of the total audio spend and is clearly the main driver of audio reach. Now, some of you may be questioning the robustness of our analysis because it's based on just 4 campaigns. Now, as we've already stated, we aim to review as many campaigns as possible, but only these 4 chose to participate, and we're very glad they did. However, it's important to acknowledge here that what this sample perhaps lacks in breadth, thanks, Steve, it more than makes up for in depth of data. Across these 4 campaigns, our analysis of the influence of daily multimedia impacts on daily web sessions encompasses the effect of 1.6 billion multimedia impressions on 30 million web sessions. And similarly, our 1-week analysis of minute-by-minute radio time lag related data alone incorporates over 40,000 time-based data points, exploring the relationship between 152 million radio advertising impacts and 2.1 million web sessions. Resulting from this depth of data, the individual regression models developed for each campaign demonstrated highly significant results from a statistical perspective, both at a multimedia level and specifically for radio. So it's fair to say, on the basis of this big data, combined with the passive nature of the data sets that have been analysed, and to reiterate here, we didn't generate any of the data ourselves, nor were we able to influence any of it in favour of radio. So we present the findings to you confident in the knowledge that they're neutral, fair, and representative of how demand generation media in general, and radio in particular, exert powerful effects within the performance marketing mix. Back to you, Donna.
Thanks, Mark. So that's what we did. What did we find out? Well, we're going to start probably with the most crucial learning from this study, demonstrating why typical attribution analysis completely misrepresents radio's effect within performance campaigns. And we're going to start with my favourite chart. Yes, I have a favourite chart. Please don't judge me. So this chart was derived from the analysis of the minute-by-minute data of the web sessions versus radio impacts. It looks at the cumulative build of effect of an average radio spot delivered by hour following its transmission, expressed as a proportion of its total potential effect. Now, it clearly supports the hypothesis that radio advertising takes time to deliver its full response potential, 19 hours, in fact. So why is this so important? Well, the implication of this finding is stark. See, as this chart demonstrates, less than a quarter or radio's total potential effect is delivered within that first hour following a spot's transmission. Resulting from this, we can identify how only 8% of a radio spot's full potential is delivered within the first 20 minutes following transmission. Now, that means that a whopping 92% of radio's effect is excluded by typical short-term time window attribution responses. No wonder performance marketers are struggling to justify radio's inclusion within their media mix. Evaluating radio this way is like asking for it to fight for its place on the plan with both hands and legs tied behind its back. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking, why should I care? It's only radio after all. And herein lies the crucial question. How effective is radio within the wider media mix when its full impact is accurately captured? And this leads us neatly on to the next finding that we'll reveal today. But to answer this question properly, you need to understand the effect of demand generation media in general on web sessions. Back to you, Mark.
And the good news here is that advertising in broad-based brand building, predominantly offline media, really works. According to the regression analysis, demand generation media combined drove an average uplift of 25% in daily web sessions. Aggregated across the 4 campaigns, that represents a total of around 1.5 million additional web sessions delivered at an average cost of £2.29 per web session. In essence, extending their media mix to incorporate offline brand building media helps online businesses exert more control over their fortunes, or, as I like to paraphrase it, means that they move beyond fighting over the scraps on the table and really start bringing home the bacon for themselves. So now back to what we're really here to talk about today. How does radio perform within this context? Back to you, Donna.
Well, according to the same regression analysis of the daily data, when its effect is accurately captured, on average, radio drove an uplift of 9% in daily web sessions across the 4 campaigns. Now, this means that radio accounts for over 1/3 of the total media-driven uplift in daily web sessions. Now, to put this into further context, you may recall that radio, including digital audio, accounted for 29% of the total media spend across these campaigns. Now, when you compare the proportion of total effect to the proportion of total spend, you start to get a sense of the potential cost efficiencies that radio advertising can bring to performance-based media plans.
But to understand this relative cost efficiency in more depth and the drivers behind it requires interrogating and comparing the data at an individual campaign level. However, this is not as straightforward as it initially appears. Firstly, baseline daily web sessions vary dramatically for the participating brands. In fact, the range was between 5,000 and 100,000 for the 4 brands we had in the study. Additionally, the different nature of the participating businesses means that what might be viewed as a high cost per additional web session for one business might be considered a low cost per additional web session for another. So based on these factors, we concluded that a straightforward cost per additional web session comparison is neither a helpful nor meaningful measure of relative campaign performance. To address the challenges presented by this huge variance in the data quantum across the participating brands, Radio Centre and Colourtext developed a consistent approach to compare radio's performance relative to other media on a campaign-by-campaign basis, which we called the Radio Cost Efficiency Ratio, or RACER for short. So this is calculated for each campaign by dividing the radio advertising driven cost per additional web session into the cost per additional web session driven by other media combined. The RACER formula looks something like this. So having assessed the radio cost efficiency ratio for individual campaigns, we're then able to calculate the average radio performance relative to other media across all campaigns. And the analysis reveals how, on average, across our 4 participating campaigns, radio generates additional web sessions twice as cost efficiently as other media combined. However, as with all advertising effectiveness studies of this nature, especially among a self-selecting, fairly random sample of in-market campaigns, this chart also reveals a wide variation in performance across the 4 individual advertisers. So while radio was on average twice as cost efficient as other media combined, in the lowest performing campaign, radio was only a third as cost efficient. In fact, that was the only campaign where radio was less cost efficient than other media. However, the best performing campaign demonstrated cost efficiency almost 3 times greater than other media and around 50% higher than average. So if you're wondering what makes the difference, we're now going to reveal the variable factors, that is, those that advertisers can influence, most associated with the best performing campaigns.
Now, as you can see here, the table shows the differences in average weekly reach and use of audio brand assets for the top 2, the above average efficiency campaigns, compared to the bottom 2. Now, the findings of this analysis are conclusive. The campaigns that achieved higher weekly reach deliver better effects. And secondly, the best performing campaigns placed an emphasis on exploiting their creative consistency. So as an aside, these findings shouldn't come as a surprise as they back up neatly with learnings from Radio Centre's Big Audio Data Mine and our ROI Multiplier study, as well as our more recent Listen Up report that revealed that the use of consistent audio branding demonstrates a huge boost in brand trust for radio advertised brands.
So having explored how to optimize radio performance effect through media planning and creative development, we're now going to move on to consider how adapting the use of radio within the media mix can enhance overall campaign performance. So we've already established the cost efficiency of radio relative to other demand generation media. And as a basic premise, this would suggest that redeploying media spend to radio as a more cost-efficient channel should mean that overall campaign efficiencies are improved. We've also considered how radio's delayed response effect is likely to result in indirect response, meaning that the full effects of radio can only be realized by reviewing changes in response across the whole range of referral sources. In this study, 3 of the 4 campaigns experienced a disproportionate uplift in web sessions referred through 3 specific pure play online response channels, as shown on this slide. The following charts reveal what the models developed for each of these campaigns tell us about how response through organic search, pay-per-click, and paid social can be optimized simply by reallocating budget from other demand generation media, proportionate to their current budget share, into radio. We'll start by looking more closely at brand A, where over 3/4 of the uplift in web sessions was referred through organic search. Now, this curve shows how brand A's referrals from organic search change as radio's share of total budget increases or decreases, i.e., no additional cost to the advertiser, just moving money around within the current budget. Now, for simplicity of presentation and to protect the confidentiality of the individual advertisers, the data is indexed, comparing the volume of referrals triggered by increased and decreased radio share of total budget to the volume of referrals recorded at radio's actual share of budget within the relevant in-market campaign, which in this case was 23%. So that's our index of 100. So you can see that the brand A campaign model reveals a strong correlation between radio budget share and organic search referrals, highlighting how increasing radio share of budget has a significant uplift effect on the volume of organic search referred sessions. And the corollary is also true. Reducing radio share of spend has a significant negative effect on organic search volumes. We've also included a demonstration of the uplift generated at a higher budget share of 50% for illustration, at which level organic search referrals are 20% higher than they were at the radio's current budget. So the model demonstrates how allocating a larger slice of the media budget to radio can enhance the response efficiencies of pure play performance channels at no extra cost. And this intuitively makes sense based on radio's ability to reach out and communicate key characteristics and facets of the brand to potential new users, driving consideration and encouraging them to investigate further using search facilities when they're available to do so. Radio Centre's word of mouth study explored this effect, revealing how people were 3 times more likely to search for a specific brand name if they heard that brand advertised on the radio. And these search generator effects of radio also extend to paid search. Brand D saw 100% of its uplift in web sessions referred from paid search. Building on this, the Brand D campaign model reveals how radio advertising boosted pay-per-click impressions by 26%, with a significantly improved, or 59% higher, conversion rate of impressions through into referrals. Again, for the same reasons explaining how radio works alongside organic search, the effect that radio advertising has on paid search impressions and referrals is completely understandable. It's logical, therefore, that increasing radio's share of spend will also have a positive effect on overall paid search referrals. Despite Brand D already investing a high share of budget into radio, around just under 60%, the model reveals how increasing this even further to 80% would still generate a 7% uplift in paid search volumes at no additional media cost to the advertiser, simply by reallocating budgets from other demand generation media. Moving beyond search, over 3/4 of the uplift in web sessions for Brand B was referred through paid social. Now, our ongoing Radio Gauge research reveals how radio advertising prompts a significant proportion of listeners to interact with the advertised brands on social media. So it wasn't a complete surprise to see radio's indirect response effect realized in this way. It's also understandable, therefore, that the Brand B campaign model highlights a strong correlation between radio budget share and paid social response, with significant increases and decreases in paid social referrals occurring in line with an associated change to radio share allocation. Again, this relationship is very strong, and the model demonstrates how more than doubling radio's share of budget to 50% can deliver a 10% increase in paid social referrals at no additional media cost to the advertiser. Further analysis, based on specifically ring-fencing the radio and paid social budgets, in this instance, split roughly 50-50, and then manipulating budget share solely between these two media, demonstrates how, for example, increasing radio's share of this ring-fenced social and radio budget to 80% could generate a 5% increase in total paid social referrals. Alternatively, how, for example, reallocating 50% of a paid social budget into radio could increase total paid social referrals by 13%. So these results indicate the broader effects exerted by radio on overall performance efficiencies. Further analysis within this study demonstrates how, beyond enhancing short-term web response, radio additionally generates longer-term brand effects for advertisers. So the nature of Google Analytics data meant that we were able to use it to evaluate historical as well as live campaigns. And additionally, for the 2 live campaigns included in the study, we were able to conduct post-campaign consumer surveys to understand radio's concurrent effect on longer-term brand health, in addition to driving short-term response. So these surveys were based on the methodology that we originally developed for Radio Centre's brand multiplier study, which referenced Byron Sharp's theory of how increasing mental availability is a crucial factor in helping brands grow in the longer term. Working with the media agencies involved, we identified the most important category entry points, or reasons that people buy a brand in a particular category, for each of the 2 brand categories involved. Based on a total sample of 800 adults, we captured ad awareness of and purchase consideration for the advertised brands across matched samples of commercial radio listeners, our test sample, and non-listeners, our control sample. Respondents were also asked to identify which category entry points they strongly associated with the advertised brands. Responses were then used to assess radio's brand building effect by comparing the differences in 2 mental availability metrics for the advertised brand between the test and the control samples. So firstly, mental penetration, which is the proportion of the sample who strongly associate the brand with at least 1 category entry point. And secondly, network size, which is the average number of category entry points that respondents strongly associate with the brand. The 2 mental availability surveys help explain how radio advertising delivers a short-term uplift in web sessions by driving awareness and purchase consideration for the advertised brands among those exposed to the radio advertising compared to those that weren't. Beyond the short-term boost to performance metrics supported by the increase in awareness and consideration, the results of these surveys also demonstrate how radio advertising concurrently builds mental availability for advertised brands, which, as Tom explained earlier, can help generate demand in the longer term. This is evidenced by increases in our 2 mental availability metrics for the advertised brands. And importantly, these brand effects are delivered over and above radio's uplift effect on short-term web session generation at no additional cost to the advertiser. So those are the results in detail. Here's a quick summary to remind you of the key takeouts, describing how radio advertising helps brands punch through the performance plateau. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, we demonstrated how current attribution methods exclude 92% of radio's true effect. If you're using a short-term response window approach, you're not really getting a proper handle on how radio is working for you. And to be honest, you're probably hugely underestimating TV's effect for the same reasons too. But this study shows categorically that when you do capture radio's full effect, it proves to be a highly valuable part of the performance marketing mix. On average, radio boosts daily web sessions by 9% and twice as cost efficiently as other demand generation media combined. Radio's indirect response effect boosts response through pure play performance channels, search and social. And in this context, increasing radio's share of the media budget is demonstrated to enhance overall performance efficiencies at no extra cost. Finally, beyond these benefits, radio concurrently boosts mental availability for performance brands, which can play an important role in helping to generate future demand and deliver ongoing sustainable growth. So those are the headlines, and assuming this study has led you to reconsider the role of radio within your performance marketing plan, what strategies can you employ to ensure that you optimize your results from your use of the medium? So here are 4 initial thoughts to take away with you. Firstly, reconsider radio within the media mix. The learning from these individual case studies is clear and I think really compelling. Reallocating budget from other media into radio can turbocharge response referred through typical pure play online performance channels. More importantly, the findings are incredibly consistent. Within each campaign and for each referral source, the data suggests that reallocating budgets from other media into radio will still reap dividends at a radio budget share of 50% and beyond. Now, it's important to acknowledge that these effects are likely to vary on a campaign-by-campaign basis, depending on the nature of the brand or the business and the current media mix. However, based on the consistency of these findings, we'd really encourage advertisers contemplating using radio as part of their performance marketing mix to consider pressure testing the medium at the higher end of the budget share spectrum, that is, around 50% or higher, that's supported by this data. Now, if as a result of today's presentation, you're considering using radio, here are some additional recommendations to help you get the biggest bang from your radio buck. Firstly, and most importantly, plan radio activity to maximize weekly reach. Radio Centre's Big Audio Data Mine and ROI Multiplier studies both demonstrate the primacy of weekly reach in driving audio advertising effectiveness. I really can't say this enough. And the importance of weekly reach is again reflected in this data, relating specifically to maximizing web response. The influence of reach on radio advertising outcomes has been shown to be consistent across all product sectors and campaign scenarios, and can be explored in more depth using Radio Centre's Radio Planning Optimizer, shown here, which you'll find in the Tools section on the Radio Centre website. Secondly, use distinctive audio assets to augment brand cut-through. The data from this study shows the importance of exploiting distinctive audio brand assets in optimizing web response effects. So it's important for advertisers to consider audio as well as visual assets to optimize the distinctiveness of their branding. Now, for many advertisers, this may be as simple as using existing audio brand assets that feature in their TV advertising, or it may be about thinking how they can use voices or music that are used in some radio campaigns on an ongoing long-term basis to help underpin brand recognition. And our final recommendation is based on our experience of having worked on this project solidly over the last 8 months. Having spent so long analysing so much data up close, our learning is that if you want to develop a more accurate and nuanced perspective on or understanding of the true impact of each element of the performance marketing mix, both on and offline, the interaction effects between them, and how the media mix can be adjusted to enhance overall campaign efficiency, both in the short and longer term, then my strong recommendation would be for you to introduce regression modeling into your performance monitoring toolbox. I've seen for myself how easy it is to take referrals on face value and assume linear relationships between activity and response that simply don't exist, or are dangerously misleading at least. To that end, I'm advocating last Clexit and recommending that UK marketers take back control of our marketing metrics from Silicon Valley. Joking aside, folks, to show you how serious we are about this, Radio Centre is ring-fencing budget to fund similar regression analyses, similar regression analyses to those that we ran for all of the participating campaigns in this study for up to 8 qualifying advertisers across the rest of this year. Details of how to qualify and apply for this analysis are going to be posted on the Radio Centre website in the next few days. So please keep an eye out for this. We'd love for people to get involved and really get a different sense of how demand generation media is driving their performance metrics. So that brings us to the end of today's presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you found the learning insightful and practical. And if you want to revisit it, the research report is going to be up on the Radio Centre website shortly. And finally, if anyone asks you to summarize today's presentation in one sentence, how about this, with a rhyme thrown in for good measure? Regression analysis of massive passive data sets reveals that if it's web traffic you want to grow, you should dial up your ad spend share on radio. Lucy, you're going to do some Q&A?
I am. Yes, hi. Thank you so much, Mark. Oh my goodness, what an end. You did a rhyme. I don't know really where to go from that, but just so everyone knows, when Mark and the team ever do these presentations, they do them with the idea that they've answered every question possible, but actually we have had a few questions come in. So the first one is, and I know you did step on it, Mark, but somebody said, why were there only 4 brands measured? It doesn't seem like the most enormous amount of brands. So do you want to take that one?
Yes, so I think we ran through this anyway, but you know, we spoke to lots of agencies and lots of clients, but because the data requirements were quite demanding and detailed, I think a lot of people said, well, are we really going to get what we want to get out of this, or it's a lot of effort, and maybe people had concerns about confidentiality. So you know, we ended up with what we ended up with, which is 4 campaigns, but you know, I'd reiterate again, the fact is that even within those 4 campaigns, there's an incredible depth of data. You know, 1.6 billion impressions, multimedia impressions, 30 million web sessions. You know, it's number one at the highest order. You know, I think it gives you confidence that the level of data that we've analysed is incredibly deep. And yeah, and I think the other thing that should give people confidence is the sheer consistency of learning that we got across each of the individual campaigns. You know, we had 4 individual models for each of the campaigns, but the consistency of outputs was, I think, remarkable. Jason, would you want to add anything onto that point?
Yes, I mean, it was a big data set, and I think where we began with the hypotheses that, you know, nobody is really veering off the road in their car to respond to something they've just heard on an ad on the radio. So I think we knew that the physics of radio listening was probably going to be defined by delayed response. And, you know, you have a hypothesis, you want to test it, you think of a reasonable way of testing it, you think of ways in which, you know, the test could go wrong and like disprove it. So after nearly 30 years in the business, to see, you know, really strong evidence that, you know, it works, that we do have a delayed response issue in radio was really gratifying. And I think that a lot of people are going to be surprised by that. And I think a lot of people would probably be a lot more interested in having their radio campaigns analysed in this way in the future, because there's just a huge opportunity loss to advertisers by missing that, 92% of radio effect before. And I think that's going to be a big influence on people thinking about this approach in the future.
Great. Okay. Another question. So from the study, are there specific sectors that perform better from the data, or can we say radio boosts all sectors' online, short and long-term goals?
So I'll pick up on that again quickly. We only had the 4 campaigns in here, so I wouldn't say we got a big enough sample to go into sort of like detailed sector by sector comparisons. But again, I'd reiterate the learning and the outcomes across the 4 campaign models was so consistent that it would give me confidence that you can look at these and go, yeah, that they're a good benchmark for how radio can work for brands across most sectors. Of course, you might get variance depending on the nature of the business and the nature of its media mix, existing media mix. But I think they're a good indicator, a good start point at least to build on and develop your own specific learning.
Okay, and obviously radio, you can buy it per area, you can buy it nationally, and someone has asked, is it fair to assume that these outcomes will be the same for regional and local spenders? We always said that radio will drive digital harder, but this gives us evidence, is what they've said. So is it fair to say that?
So, well, so a couple of the campaigns were regional, and so, yes, you can use radio to drive effects regionally if you want to do so. And again, we saw that consistency of outputs, national or regional, depending on, irrespective of the nature of the business and the existing media mix, we saw similar outputs across the board.
Okay. So keeping in mind the speed of analysis stakeholders expect when testing new channels, how feasible is it to develop a regression model if we're trying to sell in radio to an advertiser who hasn't used the channel before? That's actually quite a good question.
It is a good question. Jason, do you want to answer that? And then I'll chip in something at the end.
Yes. There is a lot of activity in the automated MMM space, and I'm kind of with Grace Kite, and maybe Tom, you might agree with this, that a lot of the automation can be quite insensitive to a lot of the context that a particular brand might be in, the campaign that it's running and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And it does really help to understand the the statistical underpinnings of how regression models work. Saying that, we have done it the hard way, haven't we, guys? We've learned a lot, and I think it's fair to say that at least within audio, we are learning what the generalizations are. And I think as we move through the project, each new campaign that we worked on, we did become more efficient, I think, because you learn. And we started from a complete fresh start. And I'd also say that a lot of the things that we were learning were conceptual as well. The effect that we see on pay-per-click advertising. It took us a long time to work out why pay-per-click impressions were breaking our models all the time. And, the way I would characterize it is that pay-per-click impressions are a subset of pay-per-click or paid referrals. And so the effect in the model, it's a bit like holding a microphone up to a speaker, and you get like these big wah kind of feedback noises in your models. And figuring out all of that sort of stuff took a while, but I think we got there in the end, and I think we're a lot quicker than we were. So we're hoping that for the remainder of this year, if people want to bring us 8 more campaigns, I think we can be a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, I'll just add that regression analysis will never be as quick as last click attribution tracking. You just got to accept that, but you also have to accept that if you only ever use last click attribution, you're not getting a proper perspective on how your performance marketing mix is working. So it's probably worth thinking about how you can combine the two, use modeling over time, and develop some systems and models to allow you to take a temperature check in the short term, but have robust models that underpin your long-term analysis that really help you understand how everything is working together.
Okay. So I think I know how you're going to answer this, Mark, but I'm going to ask it anyway. On the 19 hours of attribution graph, how do you account for frequency being built over this time period being a driver of conversions? So it's the frequency question that we always get. E.g., by hour 15, you might have heard the ad 3 times. Will that have an effect?
It probably will do, yes, but we can't explain exactly what that is, but we do know from all of our other analysis that the crucial factor in driving radio effectiveness is reach is the primary factor in effectiveness, and frequency can come alongside that. But if you don't have the reach, it doesn't matter what frequency you've got, your campaign isn't going to deliver. Reach comes first, and then frequency is a subset.
Okay.
Could I add to that, because that is a very, from a technical point of view, sorry guys, it's an interesting question. The ad response is for an average ad execution and exposure, and what we're really discussing here is the way in which ad stock functions work over time, and it's basically understanding the delay in between one ad going out and the response you can fairly attribute through the model to that. So frequency is a really interesting debate in that, and if anyone wants to come for a pint and chat about it, I'm here.
Okay.
Is that some tumbleweed I can see rolling past?
Probably.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more question. So I'm just going to pick one at random, which is the last question, which is, do we have any idea how easy it will be for measurement specialists to change their response windows for radio from 20 minutes to 19 hours? This is a very practical question, actually. We're asking people to change. How easy will it be for them to do when the models depend on huge amounts of historical data? Who wants to take that? Jason?
I'll try. I think there is a basic flaw built into attribution, last click attribution anyway, but particularly how it's applied to TV and audio. I think short-term attribution windows in the order of like 10 to 20 minutes do work pretty well on TV, and the reason being that people are usually in a 2-screen viewing experience. They're watching the main screen, they're on the sofa, and they've got the phone next to them, and they're available to respond should they wish to. So the correlation between website visits that occur within minutes of an ad going out on the telly, there is a reasonable fit with the website traffic that you see generated, and you very often see a spike on TV. With radio, it just doesn't work that way, and I think the whole approach to short-term attribution measurement for radio has got a lot of basic laws of physics problems, and my personal view is it doesn't work. Okay,
great. Well, listen, we've kept everybody for just over an hour, so I don't want to keep anybody any longer. The few of you have asked if the presentation is available. Yes, this deck will be available on our website, as will a recording of this and the full research as well. So that'll be coming, I think the research is already on there, and the rest of it will be coming through the next 24 hours. So I just really want to thank, unfortunately Tom had to go because he had another meeting to attend, but I just want to thank Donna, Mark and Jason for your time, and thank you all so much for attending. Goodbye.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks. Bye.